The courtroom was dead silent. A middle-aged woman stood trembling before the bench, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in her weathered hands. Her English was broken, her voice barely above a whisper, and every eye in Providence Municipal Court was fixed on her. What happens when someone who has lost everything, their home, their job, their hope, stands before a judge who sees not just a case number, but a human soul in crisis? This is the story of Maria Santos, a 52-year-old immigrant from El Salvador, who found herself in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom on a cold February morning in 2019. She was facing multiple parking violations that had accumulated over months, fines that seemed small to some but represented an impossible mountain of debt to a woman cleaning office buildings for minimum wage. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Behind Maria sat her teenage daughter, tears already forming in her eyes as she watched her mother struggle to find the right words in English. Court officers shuffled papers impatiently. Other defendants, waiting their turn, looked on with a mixture of sympathy and relief that they weren't in her shoes. Maria had worked 3 jobs to support her family since arriving in America 8 years earlier. She had no car insurance violations, no criminal record, no history of defiance. Just a series of expired parking meters and missed payments that had spiraled into an $800 debt she couldn't pay. As Judge Caprio reviewed her file, the courtroom held its breath. Here was a man who had become famous worldwide for his compassion, but even he had limits. Even he had to uphold the law. Maria cleared her throat, preparing to speak the few English phrases she had practiced with her daughter the night before. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper containing her prepared statement. "Your Honor," she began, her accent thick with emotion, I try to be a good person. I work very hard, but—" Her voice cracked. The paper fluttered in her trembling fingers. No one expected what Judge Caprio would say next. Maria Santos had never imagined that parking tickets could destroy a life. But that's exactly what was happening to her family. 8 years earlier, she had arrived in Providence with nothing but hope and a determination to build a better life for her children. Her husband had died in a construction accident back in El Salvador, leaving her alone with 2 young children and no means of support. The decision to leave everything behind and journey to America hadn't been easy. It had been necessary. In Providence, Maria found work wherever she could get it. She cleaned office buildings downtown from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., earning $8.50 an hour. During the day, she worked at a small restaurant, washing dishes and preparing vegetables for $7.25 an hour. On weekends, she cleaned houses in the suburbs, taking 2 buses each way because she couldn't afford a car. The parking violations had started innocently enough. Downtown Providence had strict meter regulations, and Maria often found herself running late between jobs, feeding quarters into meters when she could, but sometimes missing the deadline by mere minutes. A $15 fine here, a $25 fine there. To most people, these were minor inconveniences. To Maria, earning less than $300 a week before taxes, each fine represented a day's worth of groceries for her family. "I would look at those tickets and my heart would just sink," her daughter Carmen would later recall. "Mom would work so hard, and it felt like the city was punishing her for trying to survive." The fines multiplied. Late fees were added, interest accrued. What had started as perhaps $200 in actual violations had ballooned to $800 in total debt. Maria had tried to pay what she could, $20 here, $15 there, but the payments barely made a dent in the growing total. Most judges would have seen the case as straightforward: pay the fine or face the consequences. The law was the law after all. Personal circumstances, while perhaps unfortunate, didn't change the basic facts of the violations. But Judge Frank Caprio had built his reputation on something different. For over 2 decades, he had approached each case with what he called compassionate justice. The understanding that behind every violation, every fine, every legal transgression, there was a human being with a story worth hearing. As Maria stood before him that February morning, Judge Caprio didn't see just another scofflaw trying to avoid paying legitimate fines. He saw something that reminded him of his own family's immigrant story, of his grandparents who had come to America with nothing but dreams and determination. Most judges would have already decided the case before she even spoke, observed court reporter Linda Rodriguez, who had worked with Judge Caprio for 15 years. But Frank always leaned forward, always listened. He had this way of making people feel heard even when they were at their lowest point. Maria's daughter Carmen had taken the morning off from school to accompany her mother to court. At 17, she was already working part-time at a local grocery store to help support the family. She had watched her mother sacrifice everything for their family's future, and now she watched as that same system seemed determined to crush them over parking meters. The courtroom that morning was typical for Providence Municipal Court, a mix of working-class people facing minor violations, small business owners dealing with permit issues, and the occasional lawyer in an expensive suit handling a client's case. But there was something different in the air when Maria's case was called. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, with dignity despite her obvious fear. Perhaps it was the sight of her daughter's protective presence beside her. Or perhaps it was simply that Judge Caprio, after decades on the bench, could recognize genuine hardship when he saw it. The moment she started to speak, Judge Caprio would later reflect, I could see this wasn't about someone trying to game the system. This was about survival. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Maria Santos attempted to explain her situation to Judge Caprio. Her English, heavily accented and broken by emotion, made every word a struggle. Your Honor, I work 3 jobs. I try to pay, but... She paused, looking down at the crumpled paper in her hands where her daughter had helped her write out key phrases. The money, it is not enough. My children, they need food, they need... Her voice trailed off. The vulnerability in that moment was heartbreaking. Here was a woman who had spent years trying to remain invisible, to work hard and not cause trouble, suddenly forced to expose her family's most intimate struggles before a room full of strangers. Judge Caprio watched her carefully, his expression thoughtful rather than impatient. Where other judges might have interrupted with procedural questions about payment plans or community service options, he did something unexpected. He waited. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Maria looked up, confused by the lack of immediate judgment or dismissal. She had been prepared for anger, for lectures about responsibility, for the cold machinery of justice to simply process her case and move on. Instead, Judge Caprio leaned forward in his chair and spoke in a voice that was gentle but clear enough for everyone in the courtroom to hear. Mrs. Santos, he said, can you tell me about your work? What kind of jobs do you have? The question seemed to surprise her. This wasn't what she had expected. Court cases were about violations and penalties, not about life stories. But something in Judge Caprio's tone encouraged her to continue. I clean buildings at night, she said, her voice growing slightly stronger. Downtown, big offices, and in day I work at restaurant, and weekends I clean houses. She paused, then added with obvious pride, I work very hard, Your Honor. I'm sure you do, Judge Caprio replied. And your daughter? He nodded toward Carmen, who had been sitting rigidly in the gallery. She is good student, Maria said, her face lighting up for the first time since entering the courtroom. She wants to be nurse. She works too, to help family. Judge Caprio nodded slowly, processing this information. The courtroom remained silent, everyone sensing that something unusual was happening. This wasn't following the typical script of municipal court proceedings. Mrs. Santos, Judge Caprio continued, I want you to know that I understand what it's like to work hard for your family. My own grandparents came to this country with nothing. They worked jobs that nobody else wanted, saved every penny, and built a life for their children. Maria's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this level of personal connection from a judge. Now about these parking violations, Judge Caprio said, but looking down at the file. I can see that you've been trying to make payments when you can. Small amounts, but consistent with what you can afford. Yes, Your Honor, Maria said quickly. I try to pay what I can, but $800 is a lot of money when you're supporting a family on minimum wage jobs, Judge Caprio finished for her. The acknowledgement seemed to release something in Maria. Tears began flowing down her cheeks. Not just tears of fear or stress, but tears of relief at finally being understood. Mrs. Santos, Judge Caprio said, his voice carrying a warmth that filled the entire courtroom. I'm not here to punish people who are working hard and trying to do the right thing. I'm here to help find solutions that make sense. He paused, looking directly at her. "What would help your family most right now?" The question hung in the air. In all her preparation for this moment, Maria had never considered that she might be asked what she needed, rather than simply told what she owed. I just want to work, Your Honor," she said. "I want to pay what I owe, but I need time. I need to feed my children first." Judge Caprio nodded. "That sounds reasonable to me. What happened next would be remembered by everyone in that courtroom for years to come, instead of imposing additional penalties or demanding immediate payment. Judge Caprio made a decision that embodied everything he believed about justice and humanity. "Mrs. Santos," he said, "I'm going to dismiss these fines, all of them." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Maria stared at him in disbelief. "But, Your Honor," she began, "I should pay." "No," Judge Caprio said firmly but kindly. "You've paid enough. You've paid with years of hard work, with sacrifice for your family, with the stress of trying to do everything right in a system that doesn't always make it easy for people like you." He continued, "What I want you to do is take the money you would have used to pay these fines and put it toward your daughter's education. Help her become that nurse she wants to be." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, applause began to build throughout the courtroom, from other defendants, from court staff, from observers who had witnessed something extraordinary. As Maria Santos left the Providence Municipal Courthouse that February morning, she carried with her more than just the relief of dismissed fines. She carried a restored faith in the possibility of justice tempered with mercy, and a story that would ripple far beyond the walls of that courtroom. Within hours, news of Judge Caprio's decision had spread throughout Providence's immigrant community. Word traveled through the restaurants where people like Maria worked, through the apartment buildings where families struggled to make ends meet, through the churches and community centers where people gathered to share both burdens and hope. But the impact of that moment extended far beyond one community, one city, or even one country. When video of Judge Caprio's compassionate ruling was shared online, it reached millions of people around the world who were hungry for evidence that kindness and understanding still had a place in positions of power. "This case perfectly captured what Frank Caprio represented," said Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a professor of criminal justice at Rhode Island College who studied Judge Caprio's approach for over a decade. He understood that real justice isn't just about applying rules, it's about understanding context, recognizing humanity, and finding solutions that actually serve society's best interests. The Maria Santos case became one of the most watched episodes of Caught in Providence, the television show that made Judge Caprio internationally famous. But for those who knew him personally, it represented nothing unusual, just another day in a career built on the principle that every person who appeared before his bench deserved dignity and respect. "People called it extraordinary," reflected Carmen Santos, now a registered nurse working at Rhode Island Hospital 5 years after that courthouse encounter. "But for Judge Caprio, I think it was just Tuesday. That's who he was, someone who saw the person behind the case every single time." The ripple effects of Judge Caprio's decision in Maria's case were profound and lasting. Maria used the money she would have spent on fines to help Carmen with nursing school expenses. Carmen graduated with honors and now works in pediatric care, often telling colleagues about the judge who changed her family's trajectory with a single act of compassion. But perhaps more importantly, Maria's case became a teaching moment that influenced how other judges, lawyers, and court officials approached their work. Law schools began showing the video to students as an example of how discretion and empathy could be applied within the justice system. Other judges began incorporating elements of Judge Caprio's approach into their own courtrooms. Judge Caprio often said that his philosophy was simple: treat people the way you would want your own family to be treated. The Maria Santos case exemplified this principle in action. He saw a hard-working mother trying to build a better life for her children, and he chose to be part of the solution rather than another obstacle in her path. Frank understood that sometimes the most just thing you can do is show mercy, said Judge Patricia Lynch, who worked alongside Judge Caprio for many years. He recognized that Maria Santos wasn't a criminal or a scofflaw. She was a human being caught in circumstances beyond her control, and she deserved a chance to succeed. The case also highlighted broader issues about how minor violations can disproportionately impact low-income families. Maria's story became part of larger conversations about criminal justice reform, about the ways that fines and fees can trap people in cycles of debt and legal trouble, and about the importance of considering individual circumstances in legal proceedings. Years later, when Judge Caprio announced his retirement, Maria and Carmen Santos were among the hundreds of people whose lives he had touched who came to honor him. Their presence at his retirement celebration served as a living testament to the long-term impact that one moment of compassion could have. Judge Caprio didn't just dismiss some parking tickets that day, Carmen Santos said at the retirement ceremony. He dismissed the idea that poor people don't deserve second chances. He dismissed the notion that immigrants should be grateful for whatever treatment they receive. He dismissed the false choice between justice and mercy. The legacy of that February morning in 2019 continues today. The Maria Santos Foundation, established by Carmen with her mother's blessing, provides assistance to immigrant families facing minor legal violations that threaten to derail their progress toward stability and success. It's a concrete manifestation of the principle that Judge Caprio embodied, that justice is best served when it helps people build better lives rather than tear them down. This was just one case among thousands that Judge Frank Caprio heard during his distinguished career. But it perfectly encapsulated why millions of people around the world came to know him as America's most compassionate judge. He reminded us that behind every case file is a human story, and that the truest form of justice recognizes both the letter of the law and the dignity of every person who seeks it. Judge Caprio understood that real justice isn't about punishment. It's about finding solutions that strengthen communities and give people the opportunity to contribute their best to society. In Maria Santos's case, that meant looking beyond the parking violations to see a hard-working mother who deserved support, not additional burdens. And that is the legacy Judge Frank Caprio leaves behind, the understanding that justice and compassion are not opposing forces, but partners in building a more humane world. Thank you for reading this tribute to Judge Frank Caprio. His approach to justice, seeing the person behind every case, leading with empathy while upholding the law, and understanding that mercy and justice can work hand in hand, offers lessons that extend far beyond any courtroom. If his story and the story of Maria Santos touched you, please share it with others so his message of kindness and fairness can continue to inspire the world. In a time when division often dominates headlines, Judge Caprio's legacy reminds us that treating each other with dignity and compassion isn't just the right thing to do. It's the foundation of a just society.